are some things you think of? What was that?
Huh?
What are some of the things you think of in the Indian
Bright,
culture?
colorful, like cloth.
Yes, those
Yeah.
beautiful silk saris that women wear.
Like curry and spices.
Curry and spices, and the smell of curry seems to be everywhere. Anything else?
Religion and pride.
Religion and castes is the word you're going for. The caste system, it was always the strongest in India. There were the Brahmins at the top. Remember that caste system that they had, and the untouchables at the bottom. So they have a caste system. What about women's foreheads? What do you see on a lot of women's foreheads?
Red dot.
Yes, the red dot. And can you imagine men with white turbans on their heads, maybe playing a flute to some animal? What animal would that be? Yeah, like a cobra, snake charmers, walking on hot coals, some of the things they do that really wow people. A different language, a different culture. Skin tone, sort of a beautiful medium, almost reddish brown color for a lot of the people. So like it ranges from a light to a more dark. And the people in India don't tend to be as big as the people in America, even today. They're smaller stature. And they are very good at academics. We have lots of great academic things coming out of India. So we're going into a different culture. We're going to hear different kind of music. We're going to smell spices and curries. And let's set the stage. And this was the birthplace of Hinduism and Buddhism. So let's take a look at it. Who wants to read me setting the scene? Setting the scene, please. Okay, nice and loud, please.
Thousands of years ago, religious teachers in India tried to answer questions about the nature of the universe. Their ideas were later collected in the Upanishads. These sacred texts use vivid images to examine complex ideas about the human soul and the connectedness of all life. In one story, a man tries to show his son that the essence of life cannot be seen. He orders the boy to break open the fruit of the banyan or fig tree. "What do you see?" "Very tiny seed, sir." "Break one." "I haven't broken it, sir." "Now what do you see?" "Nothing, sir." "My son," the father said, what you do not perceive is the essence, and in that essence the mighty banyan tree exists. Believe me, my son, in that essence is the soul of all that is. Stories like this one help people understand the teachings of Hinduism. Hinduism and Buddhism were two major religions that emerged in ancient India. The ethical and spiritual messages of both religions profoundly shaped the civilization of India.
Okay, so we're going to study about Hinduism and Buddhism a little bit. How many of you have studied these religions before? Okay, good. In what context did you learn about it?
Kind of like, well, the other religion, the religion that's different. That was.
Okay, what about you? Where did you learn about Hinduism and Buddhism? Was it you, Yvonne, that raised your hand? Oh, who else raised their hand when I asked who knew about it before? Okay, how I discovered about Hinduism when I was young, maybe in my 20s, I had been raised a Christian, and I said to myself, why do I believe in Christianity? Only because my parents taught me. I'd really like it to be true, but what proof do I have? How do I know it's really true? I mean, I started really questioning. I was getting a master's degree at the time in psychology, and so I was taking a class called Theories of the Personality of Man, and everybody had their own idea of how man came about. And I'm thinking, how do I really know this whole Christianity thing is for real? And I've always been skeptical by nature, and I've always kind of wanted proof for things. I'm sure God has to be very patient with me. But I was questioning it, and so I decided that I was going to take courses in the great religions of the world. And I started taking these classes, and I started exploring all these religions, and I went on a journey that lasted over 5 years of just studying the great religions of the world and saying, could this be the truth? Could this be the truth? Could this be the truth? I wanted to know in my heart and mind that I had chosen my religion based on everything that I knew, that I had been open-minded to all ideas, and I had still decided that maybe my religion was going to be Christianity. And so I went on this journey. In fact, I took so many classes in other religions that I ended up teaching world religions at a junior college when I was in my late 20s. So I studied all these religions, and you know, there was something very interesting in the difference. Do you know what the main difference between Christianity and every other religion is? Who knows? The main difference. Yes, Amara.
I think our God is kinder, maybe? Or more
What's that?
He seems to be more kinder and more forgiving.
There are some very forgiving gods, though, in other religions. So that's not the unique thing, even though that's a difference from most, as you say. Anybody? Thank you for venturing an answer. I appreciate that. Anyone else want to guess? What is the biggest difference between Christianity and every other religion?
I don't know
Yes.
if this is right, but we have more faith because we've never really we don't have we only have the Bible to show us if it was true or not. So we have we're trusting more, I guess. I don't know. If
Okay,
that's,
good point. She's saying faith is so
because-
crucial.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there is faith in other religions, but that is a dominant part of the Christian religion. Anyone else want to guess the one thing, though, that is totally different from every other religion?
I don't know if it's right, but we believe in one God.
We believe in one God, and that used to be true until Ahura Mazda came along. You know, Zoroaster started a monotheistic religion with Ahura Mazda, and the Jews believe in one God. But that, for a long time, was the main defining factor. Okay, I'm going to tell you what it is, unless someone else wants to just guess for fun. Some really great guesses. Thank you.
Is it the Trinity? Maybe? I don't know.
The Trinity, we have the 3 in 1, which can be really confusing to people. That's a good one, too.
But Taoism have that kind of thing too.
Yeah,
Taoism-
they do. They do. But I'll tell you what. This hit me the hardest when I studied all the religions. In every other religion that exists, the only way you can get to their version of peace, like nirvana, or, you know, the Buddhists believe that they're reborn every time so that they can reach nirvana, and sort of, the way I understand it is you sort of dissolve into the universe and you no longer have pain and suffering, and so that's heaven to them. Every one of them requires that we become perfect. Every one of them. And I thought, wow, I can never make it in any of these religions. I mean, I can remember thinking, man, I hope Christianity is the right one, because Christ knows I can't become perfect. That's why he died for me, to cover my sins. Can you imagine that the only way you could ever reach a state of peace, whatever you call it, heaven or anything, was by eventually becoming perfect as a human being? Do you think anybody could ever do that? Never think an evil thought, never get angry, never lie, never... I know...
Oh, that's impossible. Only Jesus himself can do that.
Yes, and I knew I couldn't, Samantha. I was like, that's not going to be me. So I thought, I love some of these other religions. I love Buddhism, and we're going to look at some of the parts of Buddhism that I really, really love. And I was drawn to different ones, but I thought how sad it would be if these were true religions, because it's hopeless for me if these are true religions. I don't care how many times I'm reborn. I just never have known a perfect human being. Have you?
No.
My brother's a pastor of a large church, and he had a woman in his church that came up to him and said, when all the members of this church reach perfection, Christ will return. And my brother said, have you reached perfection? And she goes, I myself have not sinned for 3 years. And my brother says, you just did. You know, it's like, come on, give me a break, you know. So this is the one religion where we have a Savior that covers our imperfections. And how much I longed for that to be the true religion. Even when I was doubtful in studying, I thought, you know, and so my big circle, my big search, in case you ever do this, is really kind of strange, because you'll explore everything. And it must be in my blood, because my oldest son one day, for 2 days on a weekend, we didn't see him. You know, he came out to eat, and he was up in his room doing something, and every time I'd look, he wasn't like on the computer, and I thought, what's going on? This son, when he was about probably 18, sat down and wrote down every belief he had. He just sat there for days writing down what he believed, and then he started questioning them all. I said, oh, you are my son. I have this problem. I'm a natural skeptic about everything. But I wanted it to be true. And so I'd say to myself, I don't want to believe in Christianity just because I want it to be the truth. I want to believe in it because it is the truth. And the interesting thing about any religion is you have proofs in a way. I mean, I've been reading Josephus lately, and Josephus was a person that lived during the time of Christ, and he was a Jew. So he's not a Christian. He's not, trying to make Christ, God. But he's writing down all the historical events, and he's backing all the stories of the scripture. He's writing, it's so fascinating to me. I mean, he uses people's names, and he writes about the incident in this town and what happened in that town, and he's telling through his narrative what he's observed about this life of this person called the Christ, and it's in perfect congruence with Scripture. There are other things that, if you're ever interested in studying some of the rational reasons for believing in God, there's a book called The Reason for God that's very good on that. But anyway, whether it's rational or not, what I found in my search after going through all these religions is it comes back to faith. And so what my son ended up doing was he would pray every day, God, if you're real, give me faith in you. And that's kind of the circle that you come to, so it's interesting. But in this search, I learned some fascinating things that I think fit fine with Christian beliefs as well, but some things that I really love. And one of them is in Buddhism, and we will be looking at that one in this chapter. In fact, in the section you're going to be reading tonight. So let's go over that just a little bit, that belief. I want you to understand it before you read about it. It's going to start with the question, are there many gods or one God? Now, it's absolutely the natural thing for people in ancient times who didn't understand why the lightning was hitting a tree and catching it on fire, or why the noise of thunder was happening. These frightening things, they started attributing them all to gods. They would say there's the god of thunder and the god of storm and whatever. They had all these different gods. So don't you think that would be sort of natural for man to do? If you knew nothing and you grew up in the woods and no one taught you anything, you would start to be seeing these dangerous things as having their own unique spirit. Do you think that might be sort of natural for man to do?
Yeah.
The reason I think it is because they all did it. And so the proof is in the past. But many gods are one. Now, the Indian gods most worshipped in Hindu are Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer. Those are three gods you're going to have to know. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. But listen to some of the words you're going to learn in this chapter. Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, Vedas, Upanishad, Atman, Moksha, Reincarnation, Karma, Dharma, Ahisma, Nirvana, Tripitaka, Theraveda, and Mahayana. And my students say to me, I get these words all mixed up. So I need someone to pass these out to everyone, if I can have a volunteer to pass these out. Okay. This is a list of the words. There's 14 especially that I want you to know. And I thought if I put them on a separate sheet, you're going to be held accountable for these words and we can learn them together. So the three gods. And the goal of life in Hindu thinking is every person has an essential self called the Atman. It's like that banyan tree being in the little seed. It's the essence of things. In a way, it's similar to what we call the soul. And the Hindus want to achieve moksha. Moksha is union with Brahman. However that happens, you become part of the universe. You become part of this Brahman, this God of everything. Karma and Dharma are interesting. How many of you have heard the saying, ooh, that's bad karma? Okay, so you're kind of familiar with that word. But karma talks about the behaviors of a person's life. If you want to remember it, thank you. Think of it as character spelled with a K. K-A-R-A-C-T-E-R, character. Karma, character. Karma is you get back what you put out sort of idea. It's the behaviors of your life. And bad behaviors get bad responses. Dharma begins with a D, and that's the duties of a person's life. Doing your duty, dharma. So you can keep those separate. Hinduism has a principle of nonviolence called ahisma. Now, I wish it'd tell us exactly how to pronounce that because I had a teacher that called it ahisma, and I heard someone else say ahisma. So however you say it, at least know how to spell it. The easiest way to remember it is that it's got the word his in the middle, ahisma. And what it is it is the principle of nonviolence. So there's a sect that came out of this called Jainism. And they're so strict about nonviolence that they go along the sidewalks, you can recognize them with a broom, because they don't want to step on a bug and kill it. After all, they might be killing their grandmother, for all they know, for one thing, but they don't kill anything. They're extreme on ahisma, nonviolence. Nirvana, do you remember a musical group? You're probably too young to know. Anyone heard of the musical group Nirvana? Okay, in that group, unfortunately, I think the lead singer committed suicide in that group. Maybe he wanted to get there faster, I don't know. But Nirvana is released from the birth cycle. Nirvana is heaven. And so it was kind of a neat name for a group. Tripitaka is, what does tri mean in Latin? 3. So this means 3 baskets of wisdom. Tripitaka, 3 baskets of wisdom, and these are the writings, the sacred writings of Buddha. Now Buddhism, as it moved along, divided, okay, thank you. Hinduism, or Buddhism, as it went along, divided, just like all religions. Look how many times the Protestant church is divided. Does anyone have an idea how many Protestant denominations there are now? There's got to be hundreds. That would be an interesting question to look up on Google. How many Protestant denominations are there? I don't know the answer to that, but it started out as one. How do churches divide? There have even been offshoots of the Adventist church. Did you have something to say?
I don't think Google probably will even know.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. If you put list of Protestant denominations in Google, you probably have pages anyway. So how does the church divide? What happens? There was a group that separated off from the Adventist church, and they called themselves something, Seventh-day, I forget what they called themselves. The Presbyterian church, which is a Reformed church, has broken into the PCA and the Conservative Presbyterian. How does this happen? The original one was in England. One of the original ones in England was when the Catholic Church wouldn't let Henry VIII do what he wanted and divorce his wife, so he started a new church called the Church of England. How does this happen? What's usually the catalyst that makes a church split?
When they have ideas that's different.
Exactly. Disagreement. Disagreement. If people could stay in a church and say, I don't agree with everything in this church, but that's okay. There's enough I believe in here that I've chosen it to be the place I want to be. But no, every time we get in an argument about how you should be baptized or this or that, stuff that's not clear in Scripture, we break off and we start another branch. Now theologically, and I know this isn't religion class, so forgive me a little bit here for keeping throwing this in, but theologically, the fact that every time we break off over an issue, what happens is we make that issue the star piece of our religion. And it becomes so important that it can outshine Christ. For example, the Baptists, what's the key part of their religion? Baptism by immersion. That's really important to them. Does the Bible teach baptism by immersion? No, it leaves it unclear. But sometimes that doctrine, which is special to them, becomes so important that you can't be saved without it. You can't be, it's like everything. It's where all the heaviness is. What would be the danger of it in the Seventh-day Adventist church? What would be the doctrine that we could become super legalistic about and let it be blotting out other parts of theology? What would that be?
Going to church on the Sabbath.
Keeping the Sabbath, because that's the unique doctrine of the church. So all these things, you have to remember that in the Christian church, the center is still Jesus Christ and what he did for us. And so as these churches split and they get their pet doctrines, theologically that can be a very bad thing, because they get it takes their vision away from Christ. So that's just speaking as from Christian theology. So anyway, along comes this guy. I love this. I read a book called what is it called? It's a book about Siddhartha Gautama. I think it's called one of his names, like Gautama, or what is that book? I'll have to go look in my office. But it's a wonderful book for getting the idea of the Buddhist religion. And the Buddhist religion actually has a founder. Hinduism is so old, we have no idea who started it. It's just, the book, the Vedas, we don't know who wrote it, we don't know who started the religion, but we know who started Buddhism. And he's called the Buddha. But his real name in real life was Siddhartha Gautama. And Siddhartha Gautama, we're going to look at him in this section. He, let's look on page 78. It says, in the foothills of the Himalayas. Now, the Himalayas are huge, beautiful snow-capped mountains. And in the foothills lived Siddhartha Gautama. And he founded a new religion, not really on purpose. This is what happened. Gautama's early life is buried in legend. We know that he was born about 566 BC to a very high caste family. His mother dreamed that a radiant white elephant descended to her from heaven. Signs such as this led a prophet to predict that the boy would someday become a wandering holy man. To stop that from happening, Gautama's father kept him in the palace, surrounded by comfort and luxury. So here's a rich boy, and he's raised having everything he could possibly want. Prince Gautama married a beautiful woman, had a son, and enjoyed a happy life. One day, as Gautama rode beyond the palace gardens, he saw a sick person, an old person, and a dead body. For the first time, he became aware of human suffering. Deeply disturbed, he bade farewell to his wife and child and left the palace. He never returned. What he did was he went on a journey where he was going to try to figure out the sense of this mess. Why is there suffering? Why is there sorrow? Why is there pain? He wandered for years. He talked to Hindu scholars, and it was sort of like the Australian walkabout, right? He took off on his walkabout to discover himself. But this is what he came up with. Apparently, he was sitting under a tree, and for many years that tree, there was a tree in India that they said this is the tree that Buddha sat under, and it was a Bodhi tree, a big fig tree. And so he's sitting there, and he's just meditating, and he's thinking, I'm just going to think and think and think until I figure this out. And this is what he came up with, and I really like this. Are you ready? 4 noble truths. Okay, it's on page 79. What's the first noble truth?
All life is full of suffering, pain, and sorrow.
Is that true? All life is full of suffering, pain, and sorrow. Is that true? Okay, now many of you are Christians. Some of you are not, but many in this room are Christians. Do you believe that's true? Does that fit with Scripture?
Well, not to you.
What does it mean by all life? Like all of life, or?
It would be
Like
all
everyone.
living things on this earth have suffering.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So, number 2. What's number 2?
The cause of suffering is the desire for things that are really illusions, such as riches, power, and knowledge.
Okay, let's think about this. One starts to get tricky. Is that true? When you are sick, let's say you have cancer, or you have a bad flu. He's saying the reason you're so miserable is because all you're doing is sitting around wishing that this would go away. All you're doing is wanting things to be different. Let's say the pain you have from breaking up with a boyfriend or girlfriend. That's pretty serious pain. But the pain happens because you could wish you could have the person back. If you didn't wish that, you wouldn't be in pain. So what does number 3 say?
The only cure for suffering is to overcome desire.
Okay, so the theory is if I break up with somebody and I'm in pain, it's because I'm desiring to be back with them, so the way to feel better is to stop desiring that. Does that make sense so far? How many think it makes sense so far? I do. It does make sense. If you could not want that person, you wouldn't be in pain anymore, right? The trick is, how do you do that? Now, the way that this is where we separate from, as far as those of you who are Christians and those of you who are Buddhists, this is where we separate. The answer from Buddha is that the way to get rid of desires and suffering is to follow the Eightfold Path, which I'm not going to make you memorize it. It's complicated, and all they do is list them here, which doesn't give you any idea why they would work. But they say to follow the Eightfold Path. The Christian would say, if I'm suffering because I'm desiring something I don't have, my answer is to lay that at the feet of Jesus Christ and say, Lord, you know, I always wanted to play basketball, but I only grew up to be 5 foot tall, and that's my height, and I'm in constant pain because I want to be taller. You know what? I'm just going to put that in this little package, and I'm going to lay it at the feet of Jesus, and I'm going to ask him to take it. I don't need to worry about that. Apparently, God didn't mean for you to be a star basketball player if you only grew to be 5 foot tall, right? Well, maybe if you're a super jumper, but you know what I'm trying to say. You got the idea. There's every person, especially in adolescence, has something about them they wish was different. Maybe there's an exception, but I've never met one. I ask this to my class every year. If you could change something about your body, would you be able to think of something you wanted to change? How many would be able to think of something? Just, one thing about your body if you could change it. Taller, shorter, stronger, better hair, natural blonde, redhead, smaller feet, skinnier waist, something.
How much my body weight is.
How many could think of one thing at least they'd say to the magic fairy, oh, change this? You can't think of any.
I'm not at the moment.
That's great. That's
Me neither.
unusual.
I
Very
can't think of
unusual.
any either.
All of us, most of us, I would say still this holds to the 90% level. Most of us could think of something we want different. And that something can plague us our whole lives and cause us pain unless we can just stop wanting it. Let it go. God created you the way He wants you to be. If you accept that, then you can just let it go and look for what you're supposed to be doing with what you have. I used to have a saying on my, you know how stoves have those things above them that suck the air up? What do you call those? The hoods? I had a saying on there for years that said, to worry about what you don't have, is to miss what you do have. Now, those of you who had to think a little while to find one thing, you know what that tells me? You have a lot of good things going for you. The one thing you want to change could be natural talent in something or a brilliant mind in math, or whatever it is. If you had to think that hard to come up with something, that's great because it means you have so many gifts that you're overlooking and you're pining for this one thing. So Buddha would say, listen, all life is full of suffering. Everybody has something they'd like to change. The cause for this is your desire to change it and get over it, and you'll be fine. Well, how do I get over it? I follow the Eightfold Path. That's Buddha's answer. Now, unfortunately, in a text this size, you're not going to learn the details of the Eightfold Path, but it does list them. Right views, right aspirations, right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right contemplation. And you reach these through meditation, and it really makes sense if you ever want to study it. I mean, you can see why they would come to this. So this is the guy you're going to be reading about tonight. I didn't tell you how old he was, how long he lived, where he went. You're going to read about that. And then they compare Hinduism and Buddhism. And this is what I want you to do. I try to encourage you to do reading notes. And there's always suggestions in this book is wonderful because it takes brain mapping and it applies it to what you're reading. And it's always up in the taking notes section at the beginning of each section. And I want you to do this one. This is an assignment. You're going to draw a circle for Hinduism and you're going to draw a circle for Buddhism. And you're going to put as many things as you can that they leave the same here. And the differences that don't go in here on either side will go in the main circle. Okay. You all know how to do these kinds of circles already. So that's what you're going to do on this section. Very interesting section. Okay, also you are going to have a quiz on this vocabulary I gave you. And let's see, I think that's right. Let me look on the lesson plan. Okay, homework. Read chapter 4:1. Taking book notes is highly recommended. This one is required. You don't have a quiz on, a quiz on the vocabulary that I just handed out to you today. It's not really hard, and when I joke about if you can get through this chapter, it's not really harder than other chapters. It's just some people get hung up on the words. They say those words are weird. Well, all words are weird. You're just used to some of them. They're all just sounds put together in a little chain. So if you can just open your mind to new sounds, new words on this chapter, you're going to be fine. Okay, any questions on the assignment or the reading or comments on what we talked about? Yes?
Are we taking a quiz tomorrow?
Tomorrow is, no, I don't think we are. Tomorrow's Friday, right?
Oh, yeah.
No, you have a timeline quiz on the whole BC timeline. So your quizzes, let me see what it says here.
You're not able to have.
The newest version says, let me see, world history. Read chapter 4:1. Taking book notes is highly recommended. This is your final chance to study for tomorrow's quiz on the entire BC timeline. Nothing else planned for that point. Your homework tomorrow, though, on Friday, will be to read section 2. So we have a few minutes. Let's take a look at what that's going to be about. Does it help you to go over it a little bit before you read it? Because some of you look like you're ready to fall asleep, and I don't want to bore you. Yes, did you have a question?
So when are we taking the vocab text?
We will do that after the weekend.
Okay.
So you don't need to worry about it, because tomorrow's devoted to the whole BC timeline. How many of you are already pretty ready for that quiz? Good. Those of you who study ahead are going to be much stronger, because you learn better if you study in small increments many times and not just at the last minute in one increment. All right, let's look at Powerful Empires of India. It starts on page 81. Who can read Setting the Scene for this one? I need another volunteer. Okay.
So this
The
one.
king's will is not that which pleases him, but that which pleases the subject. This is the author of ancient Indian of the rulers. According to the ruler duties included maintaining peace and order by enforcing laws, resisting invaders, and encouraging economic growth. Achieving these goals was difficult. Northern India was ultimately a battleground where rival Rajas fought for control of the rich Ganges Valley. Then in 321 BC, a young adventurer, how do you say that?
Chandragupta.
Yeah. Forged the first great Indian empire.
Maurya. Yeah, Maurya. Chandragupta. All right, yeah, that's a mouthful, isn't it? All right, so the king, I like this idea, do you guys? That a king's good was not what pleased him, but what pleased the people. I'd like to see all leaders do that. And that's pretty good advice, but it was difficult. So we're going to read about two great empires. One is the Maurya Empire, and the other one is, let's see, the golden age of the Guptas. Oh, the thing that's confusing in this is it was started by Chandragupta, but there's another kingdoms of the Deccan, golden age of the Guptas. Oh yeah, it's confusing because there's another empire called the Guptas, and people they think, well, that's in the name of Chandragupta, so he must belong to that empire, but he doesn't. He belongs to the Maurya. Okay, so the Maurya Empire, we know about Chandragupta largely from reports written by Megasthenes, who was a Greek ambassador to that court. How nice that we have written actual records of this dude. And you're going to read about one of the great leaders, and I think it's really great. His name was Asoka. He was the grandson of Chandragupta, and he became a ruler, and he did something very, very interesting. I want you to look for what that was. I'm impressed with this dude. Then the kingdoms of the Deccan, we just have a short section on that. The golden age of the Guptas. Although many kingdoms flourished in the Deccan, the most powerful Indian states arose in the north. About 500 years after the Mauryas, the Gupta dynasty again united much of India. Gupta emperors organized a strong central government that promoted peace and prosperity under the Guptas, who ruled from AD 320 to about 550. How long is that? Just roughly.
AD what?
AD 320 to about 550. Over how many hundreds of years? Over 200 years. Okay, they ended when they were 200 and something years old. That can happen to civilizations. Do you know how old ours is, the United States?
200 something?
It's just over 200 too. So make sure you do your civil duty to keep us going. Peace and prosperity existed during this time. Much power was left in the hands of individual villages, and I bet they liked that. there was a Chinese visitor called Fa Xian who visited this city and said, the people are very well off without poll tax or official restrictions. Only those who till the royal lands return a portion of the profit as a land tax. The kings govern without corporal punishment. Criminals are fined according to circumstances, lightly or heavily. Interesting. And then it talks about some of the other developments during that golden age, and you will be impressed. There are a couple things that are quite shocking. One is that they knew how to do plastic surgery on a certain level, and the other is that they had discovered 1,000 years before the Europeans how to do smallpox vaccinations. So this is a fascinating society, and that's not all they did. So when you're doing your book notes, you're going to want to write down the accomplishments that happened during this golden age of the Gupta dynasty. In math, some really great concepts, and probably one of the most important ones for being able to solve problems. There were numbers 1 through 10 up to this time, but no one had thought of making a number for something else. 0. So the Guptas started that, which opened up a lot in mathematics, and you'll read about what they did in architecture. Sanskrit is still the sacred language of the people at this time, and they actually wrote in Sanskrit as their main language during the Gupta Golden Era. The Gupta Empire reached its height just as the Roman Empire in the West collapsed. So it was strongest when Rome fell. Now we, on our timeline, we're pretty early. We're doing the River Valley civilizations. What's the first one? Sumer. And what were some of the other great River Valley civilizations? Egypt, China, India, Greece, and then we had Rome, still part of the ancient period, up through its republic. So let's say up to about when Rome was found, which is approximately 500 years before Christ, we have the River Valley civilizations and ancient history. Then we move to the next 1,000 years, and the dominating thing in Europe in the next 1,000 years is the Roman Empire. But in India, we had this magnificent dynasty happening during that time. After the Roman Empire falls, in the West, the next period becomes the Middle Ages, and that lasts about 1,000 years. And then we have the Renaissance. Does anyone know what Renaissance means? Renaissance is the French word. Renaissance, c'est la Renaissance. In fact, the British say it, Renaissance. They say it closer to the French. We say Renaissance. Does anyone know what naissance means? What do they call the ward in the hospital where like they keep the little preemie babies and stuff? Neonatal, newborns. Natal is the word in Latin for birth. In French it's called, they all begin like with an N, but naissance means birth. Naissance means birth. Rebirth. Exactly, rebirth. So renaissance, rebirth. What do you think was reborn during the Renaissance?
Like art forms, languages, religions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Knowledge started to come back. During what we call the Dark Ages, some good things happened, and we're going to learn about them, but things had kind of slowed down mentally. There was great advances in architecture, and they started universities, but their advances in math were like zip, and so this is the reawakening. It's after the Black Plague is past and all that happened at the end of the Middle Ages. Then after the Renaissance, we're going to go to the Enlightenment, and I'll be describing that. It's often called the Age of Reason. But these are all periods that we're identifying in Western history, and yet our book is called World History. So that's why, in a way, I feel like the book is a misnomer. It's really heavily Western history, but it tells you great things that are happening in other countries like Africa and Asia at the same time. And one of them is what's happening in India at this time during the Roman Empire is the Golden Era of Gupta. So one of the things I love to do is have you make a timeline. You'll be doing it second semester as a project where you can kind of see all these things happening at the same time. All right, that's it for today. You have 2 minutes, I think. Does it, oh, we're on a different schedule?
Class is over at 9:10.
What's all our homework?
Oh, then you should read section 4:1. I want you to find out what happened, how Siddhartha Gautama.
After 4, section 1, that's our homework.
Yeah, read section 4:1. I did setting the scene and kind of went over it, but I want you to read about Siddhartha and learn what happened to him and how this religion started. And then the comparison between Buddhism and Hinduism. You could even start on this. Okay.